Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here, reporting live from what appears to be a scene of the movie The Road. This is the new normal, folks. Smoked out suns and hot days, and just a general stark feeling to everything. This smoke, I tell you, this is something that I never seen as a kid. And now every year it's pretty much its own season. Forest fire smoke from thousands of miles away. Anyways, that's how it is. That's a new normal, I guess. So today I want to talk a bit about something I call the asphalt matrix. I've also considered calling it the asphalt incubator. What it essentially is the collective urban imposition on the planet Earth by man. The asphalt is kind of like the dam beneath our feet. And concrete, in a way, is intended to give us the edge over nature, if you will. It's intended to separate us from nature and hold nature at bay so that we may build buildings, put foundations on our homes, create highways, freeways, parking lots, and all the rest. And just like a dam, just like a levee, which is holding the forces of nature at bay, occasionally things come through the cracks. Nature always finds a way through. And I know I'm sounding like the guy off the movie Jurassic Park, but nature does seem to always find a way to circumvent our concrete infrastructure that we've put on the earth to protect us from it, ironically, because it is what nourishes us. So this is going to be a fairly lengthy rant, and I have a lot of notes because I had a lot of different thoughts related to this metaphor of the concrete matrix. And part of why I wanted to talk about this is to rationalize for some people why I prep. I know there's some people who wonder, Nate, like, why do you bother with this sort of thing? You know, you have an honors degree, you have a professional career, yet here you are talking to a camera endlessly, it seems, about crap hitting the fan when you live in one of the most prosperous nations on earth. Now, I've done videos before on how urbanization, the man-made artifactual world, is all about right angles. You go into an urban center and the buildings are straight for the most part. It's a lot of straight lines and right angles. It's the grid. And if you look at a grid, what does a grid look like? Well, a grid is this mesh of lines, essentially. And the organic world is not like that. The organic world, in fact, is quite curved. It's quite continuous. It's not broken up. If you look at the painter Picasso and his artwork, that, for me, I don't know much about Picasso, but when I look at his artwork, I can only imagine what he was trying to convey with that was that in many ways we are fragmented in our perception of the world. And instead of seeing continuity, curvature, organic flow of things, everything is broken up into these fragments that we put together with our perceptions, with our asphalt brain. Because language has allowed us to break the world into pieces. If you listen to the band Tool, they have a song called Right in Two, and it's all about man's endless breaking things into dualities and dialectics, as opposed to just seeing things as one continuous, harmonious flow of energy. We necessarily, as it's required to evolve, it seems, we break things down, and this allows us to have numbers and, you know, the scientific method and all the rest. And this is, you know, the basis of why pi cannot be resolved, why it's an infinite series of what's it called, an irrational number that just goes on forever, because number can never fully conceptualize quality. So anyways, I'm getting a little more abstract, but the idea is that nature has this relentless desire to grow and overcome all of the symmetry that we try to impose upon it. And in the same way, we have to tell ourselves lies about our true animal nature in order to fit in to this this asphalt matrix that we've created, because it's broken up, it's fragmented, it's inorganic, it's not real, which is why we have so many psychological problems. A classic example I'll use is tribal peoples who, by and large, don't wear a lot of clothes. Obviously, the ones I'm talking about in the southern hemisphere, which are pretty much the only ones left. They don't wear clothes. Sexuality to them doesn't have a perverted slant to it like it does in the modern day. I mean, modern pornography just seems to be getting more and more obscure as time goes on, and this seems to conflict with the whitewashed, sanitized, sterile society that we all front. You know, the superficial, the makeup, the professionalism of the modern day, and then you go on to the dark web of things, and there's just crazy, you know, S&M type shit going on. And part of the reason why I think people have to do that is because if you think about the breast, for instance, in tribalistic societies, the breast is always there. There's no curiosity about it. There's nothing to be left to your imagination. A breast is a breast. It serves one purpose, and that's to nourish an infant. But in the modern day, it takes on this very hypersexual aspect because it is veiled. And so, you know, men were enticed by cleavage and all the rest, and some women, I guess, because it's an urge that we have to repress. So libido is a sexual energy. Tribalistic peoples, when their libido comes in, when the thought comes into their head, they execute. You know, for the most part, it's not something that has to stay there and fester and roll around like it does with us. And eventually we blow our tops, or in some people's case, blow your load. Sorry to be so graphic, but I mean, it is what it is, right? So man can no longer just act on his impulses as soon as they arise. We have to stuff them down and stuff them down and stuff them down. So when it comes out, it manifests in orgiastic thinking, in a sense. And that's not just the case with sexuality. Sexuality, libido, can also come in many other forms. There's a psychological thing called sublimation, and that's by where you take your sexual energy and you transmit it into creative processes. So I'm not sure if you're familiar, but some musicians and artists, they swear by sexual abstinence so they can use that creative energy in another way. They think that it makes them more creative. And, you know, even the root word creativity, to create, you know, is the same thing like a sperm creates when it, you know, meets an egg. It's the essence of creation, essentially, is the sperm meeting the egg. So there's that relationship between art and sexuality. Getting a little bit off topic, but I promise you it's all gonna come back around. Now, it's very windy, so I hope that my microphone is picking all this up. So like I said, we tell ourselves lies in order to fit in, and the end result of this is a lot of psychiatric problems, personality disorders, which are fairly vague in terms of their explanations, and it's not a hard science. Bipolar disorder, depression, anxiety, attention deficit hyperactive disorder. Schizophrenia, as we know, is more of a genetic disorder, so that one doesn't really fall into it being socially constructed or impacted. It is in some ways, but by and large, it isn't. So many of us are trying to seek validation through aligning ourselves with this fragmented view of the world that the asphalt matrix has imposed on us, as much as it has given us many luxuries, and it's given us just things beyond our wildest dreams. You know, like it's given us a level of comfort, or at least so it would seem, in life, which nobody would ever would trade it to go back to the jungle and have to just be foraging for calories all day. Most people anyways. Some people are seeking that, and they're doing the off-grid thing, which I'll talk about in a minute. Really what the off-grid person is trying to achieve is to escape the forced symmetry, the hyper-regulated rectangular world of things which has been superimposed on the natural world. And people are wanting to get back to that because there is a disjunct between how our biology works, how we naturally want to do things, and how society says we have to do things. And as such, there's a variety of reasons why people are wanting to move back onto the land. And I'm going to talk about that a bit more as well. So the multitude of laws that govern our conduct within this asphalt matrix, it leads to a chronic stress that most people aren't aware that they're under. I know it's not the same as, you know, having to starve to death or having to be in a war-torn area or something like that. It's a first world problem by and large, but nonetheless, the death by 1,000 paper cuts, the chronic stress of the urbanized, fragmented world that we live in is an actual thing. And of course, that does lead to some psychiatric problems, as previously indicated, where there's this disharmony between our primitive self and our urbanized self, and which of course leads to lots of issues with people. As we see it, it's expressed in not only psychiatric disorders, but extreme forms of behavior like the pornography that I was talking about, the sexual aspects of things, the deviant behaviors, the crime. You see, the naturalist movement is a way to try to balance all of this out. That's why, you know, people in the first world romanticize about tribes and their type of lifestyle, and, you know, herbal remedies and naturopathy, you know, things of that nature, because in a way we desperately want to live at a balance. But by and large, in the mathematical urbanized world, we can't really do that, at least not for long, and never do it fully. So what happens is people will have periodic freakouts and meltdowns, which for the sake of simplicity we'll just call road rage. And basically it's just a mass hysteria in a way, which is the result of being so bound and forced into doing different behaviors which we were never naturally supposed to do all day, every day. So you can just be, you know, driving to work, minding your own business, life is good, you're living in the first world, your stomach is full, there's gas in your tank, you're just going to work, all of a sudden somebody cuts you off, and you almost instantly turn into an angry person. And, you know, I speak from experience, I'm getting better at controlling this now, but, you know, I'm starting to find better ways to resolve that. Particularly, you know, just being humble and trying not to escalate, forgiving people for what they've done, because, you know, you don't want to, there's enough battles to fight without getting in these sporadic conflicts throughout the day. And it's because everybody's really teched out in the asphalt matrix that there's this underlying latent unhappiness which is in a lot of people. They're not fulfilled on some level, so they lash out in ways which are really immature and unnecessary in a lot of cases. When you see the nice pretty suburb or you see the nice pretty girl, there's a backstory to everything, okay? Everything has an equal and opposite reaction, and opposite in a sense. You know, for matter, there's antimatter. I'm not a physicist, but I guess you get what I'm saying. So take, for instance, the suburbs, the nice pretty beautiful suburbs. Well, if you look just down the street, there's a massive garbage dump. And a lot of the products that we use are coming from places where there's no environmental regulations, and it's a disaster. So, you know, all of the nice pretty veneer, the facade, the front end that you see, as a result, has a back end. You know, it's like Facebook. People only post positive things about themselves. You don't actually see the backstory, you don't see the fighting, the broken marriages, all the rest. All you see is I'm happy and inspirational thoughts and all the rest. Some people occasionally will tech out on there too. Or you take the pretty girl, for instance. You know, a woman goes into the washroom for 2 hours to do her makeup, comes out looking bloody amazing, but you go into the washroom afterwards and it just reeks like all kinds of chemicals, the garbage is full, there's makeup everywhere, it's a disaster. So it comes at the expense of something, and of course all those cosmetics had to be engineered in labs, and, you know, who knows what the environmental footprint of that was at the same time. So there's a consequence to our trying to seek perfect symmetry while we are able to nearly achieve it, while we're able to nearly achieve a perfection of sorts in, you know, the construction or architecture, our women, etc., men, whatever. There's a consequence. It's like a bodybuilder, you know, who can have an incredibly aesthetic physique, but, you know, how many cows had to die, or how many protein shakes did he have to drink in order to get to that point, right? So there's always a consequence to things. In nature, it's a little bit different. There's nothing which approaches the right angle perfection of the city per se, although, you know, the Fibonacci sequence is in a lot of things in nature, flowers, the cosmos, etc., things like that. But the artifacts that man creates, or how he creates himself, is far more geometrically precise, we'll say. But, you know, in nature, it's all on a continuum. So the flower eventually degrades over time. The crap, you know, from an animal doesn't smell as bad as human crap because we're putting all this garbage. There's another great example. Eating all this garbage we put into our bodies, and, you know, the end result is that it smells terrible when it comes out. And, you know, the same thing with animals. A cow that eats grass all day or eats natural things, it doesn't smell as bad unless, of course, they're eating bad stuff. But generally speaking, animal scat doesn't smell as bad as humans because they're not eating a bunch of junk. All right, so why do people prep, and why are people going off grid? Why the survival aspect? Because like I said, the asphalt matrix, it's like a guy holding a door, you know, and on the other side of the door, there's raging water coming in. It's like when we build a levee, and in order to keep the water out, in order to keep nature out, that metaphor can be extended to so many different institutions in society. So for instance, like I said, the asphalt, it prevents all the flora from overtaking the roadways. You know, otherwise, you know, in 20 years without being serviced or maintained, the trees and the grass are going to take back the roads. Another example is pesticides, herbicides, agriculture. All of these things we use in order to keep the forces of nature at bay, to control weeds, to control the variety of different pests, to ensure that our crops can withstand, you know, the droughts, the smoke nowadays, which is gonna affect the crops at some point. I mean, this is an annual thing now, it seems, and it's got to have some effect. Irrigation, trying to move water from one place to another, fresh water sources, just hanging on for dear life as 7.5 billion people and growing continue to want more and more and have higher and higher standards of living. There's the literal dams that prevent the waterways and, you know, the terraforming that we do. That's another thing that could be construed as the asphalt matrix that I'm talking about. There's psychiatry, who holds back all of those animalistic, primitive tendencies that we have in order so that we might be happy-go-lucky consumers for another day and make sure that the economy, the fake economy, doesn't collapse, which is based all on fiat and the total human construct. It has no real basis in the physical world other than these agreed upon pieces of paper. Firefighting is another thing, trying to control all these fires that are burning out of control right now. I mean, this is gonna have an impact. It really feels like the present that we're living in, we're gonna talk about it someday as, you know, how could we not see the signs? I mean, we obviously see the signs, but there's a lot of people who just have their heads in the clouds right now and don't seem to think that this is an issue. But I don't know what it's going to take. It's going to take some serious crop loss one year, probably this year, because in Europe the drought that they're having there is wreaking havoc on their ability to produce food. A few years like that, and that's all it's going to take for things to get really real. Medicine, the viruses, the inoculations, holding back this deluge of viruses, bacterial infections, and everything else that we're preventing, you know, and just keeping us alive in this matrix, not counting all the chemicals and the toxins and all the pollutants that are in the air that medicine is allowing us to endure. Even things simply like air conditioning. You know, without air conditioning, a lot of people aren't going to be able to work in those high office towers. And so it's just one more way that we're trying to tame nature so that we can continue this freak show for one more day. It's basically to the point where one wrong move, one misstep, and it's going to be a chain reaction of events, and the dominoes are going to start falling. The house of cards is going to start falling. If anything suffers, agriculture, the economy, global geopolitical tensions, Any of the things I just mentioned, if one of them falls, the risk of other ones falling increases, and if two of them fall, then that risk increases exponentially, and so on and so forth, until a point where you're just going to have the whole system probably collapse. I want to say a quick word here about transhumanism and the cyborg thing, people interfacing with technology. And right now we're in the transitional phase of that. And part of the reason why we have so many psychiatric disorders, I theorize, is because the asphalt matrix is really coming into conflict with our primal selves. And the only way that we're ever going to live in harmony with that, because we've been our primal selves for a million years, you know. You could take a human being from 70,000 years ago, paleontologists know this, take a human being from 70,000 years ago, you can condition them to hold a job in the modern day. So as humans, we haven't really changed that much. Culture has changed significantly, but a guy fighting the Civil War, you could take that same fella, put him here today, and he would just be as much steeped in meme culture and all the other nonsense that we use to distract ourselves from the realities of the way that we're living in the modern world right now. So we haven't really changed that much. So I think that perhaps what's happening right now as artificial intelligence, and that's another thing altogether, as that starts to increase in its capabilities, eventually human beings are going to interface, and the end result is going to be to completely eradicate that primal aspect of ourselves, or control it in a way which we don't have all of these negative effects. Now, I'm not saying I advocate for this or anything like that, but at some point, once we pass the neurochemical phase of our psychiatric evolution and we start getting into digital interfacing with the human mind, if we even make it that far, that is, then maybe that is going to not necessarily reconcile the issues, but it's going to help us to better integrate and adapt into the asphalt matrix. And I think that, you know, if you look at religion, I talked about sex a lot. Basically everything, most things in the world sell by sex or religion. They use sex or religion. These are the most primitive psychological and emotional feelings that we can experience, are things of a spiritual, religious nature, and things of a sexual nature. And religion, what that does for a lot of people is it forms a bridge into this organic tribal world that I'm talking about, and it tries to act as a bridge between the asphalt matrix and the tribal world in order to appease that part of ourselves that still longs to be connected to something greater, that still longs to be connected to the tribe, to the earth, to just the natural rhythms of things. And part and parcel of this is our fear of our own mortality, which also fuels survivalism, prepping, is that mortality is something that in the modern day is seen as a bad thing. You know, the fact that we die, you know, we cry at funerals. I've always thought that, you know, we should celebrate funerals. We should celebrate funerals as much as we celebrate births, you know, or if the reverse would be in the modern day, you know, maybe despair a bit about births because you're bringing somebody into this world. Now, I'm not saying that, I'm not that cynical that I'm saying, you know, we shouldn't be bringing people into this world. Obviously, I believe we should. We've totally lost our gallows humor with regards to our own mortality and our own existence. And a part of that is rooted in this idea that the asphalt matrix perpetuates, that we're going to live forever and everything is going to be good all the time and everything has a happy Hollywood ending, when that's not true. Things just end. Usually it's half good, half bad. People, I believe, are 50.0000001% good, and the other half of them is bad. And you can use that evil within you for good, or you can use it for bad. It's up to you. Think about that for a while. Part of the reasons that why we prep is that there's a deep-seated collective understanding that our current way of life is unsustainable, and that this patchwork of impositions on nature, it's soon going to be kicked off like a cowboy on a bucking horse. Like, it's only a matter of time before nature just, you know, shakes us off like a dog shakes his water off after he jumps in a lake type thing. There's that, of course, that longing to be free of all of these social conventions, of all of the laws, the mores, the hyper-regulation, and all the rest, which dictate how you live your life and who you live it with, and you know, every little nuance of your existence now is monitored, regulated, all the rest. People want to be free from that. That's why they're moving to an off-grid lifestyle. Another reason why people are becoming survivalists is because we're starting to recognize, as much as we are also conditioned to fear our own mortality more, we're also starting to recognize that we are responsible for that mortality should the grid ever collapse. So people are scrambling now, myself being one of them, to try to get back some of those primal skills should this edifice of human evolution just collapse. Learn self-sustainability, because we know that this can't go on forever. We know that the weeds are going to keep bursting through the cracks in the pavement, and eventually, someday, nature is going to win. I think a part of this is also that we want to affirm our inner animal, affirm the part of us that makes us human, because when you're living in such a robotic, asphalt tech matrix that we're living in, it's very hard to find meaning in your life if you can have your job replaced by a computer. And if all of the functions of humanity seem to be things which are not appreciated, and all the things that are uniquely human are things that don't seem to be appreciated by the grid, then there's this desire to have real relationships, to experience real human emotions, to have those spiritual experiences, as intangible and unexplainable as they might be. People are longing for that sort of thing. That's why people use drugs, is because it really is a primal spiritual thing. A lot of it, of course, is to try to numb the fact that of everything I've just talked about, their incongruency of their self with the asphalt matrix. But a big part of it is also to have that profound spiritual, tribal, dancing around the fire, worshiping the gods type archetypal experience, because many of us are spiritually constipated in a way, and that's why people use hallucinogenic substances. And I'm not talking about marijuana, that's not on the same level, but people use hallucinogenic substances like psilocybin, ayahuasca, to become less spiritually and emotionally constipated. It really is an emotional spiritual laxative. It's not, I wouldn't even consider it a drug, because for many people, the effect that it's going to have on you is going to be profoundly positive, and what it's going to show to you is all the lies that you tell yourself about your life, who you truly are, and it's going to help you come to terms with those things, so long as you do it in a controlled way. Now, I'm not condoning the use of illicit substances or anything like that, so I don't want you to think that, but just giving you something to think about. So basically, that's all I have to say today. I'll probably, you know, reference this concept of the asphalt matrix in the future more and more, but essentially it's the sum total of all our phoniness and the bullshit lies we tell about ourselves, the things that we deny about our true primal nature. The sum total of that, not only are we in denial about those things, but we're also in denial about a lot of other things which do have tangible consequences in the real world, which are quickly coming to a head, as it would seem. So thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Canadian Prepper out.